All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mindgasms. Decided to do our first book club chat on the novel called The Stand by Stephen King. And talking about that with Parker's back here. And of course, the Woke Centrist A.K.A. Dustin Cubes A.K.A. Dustin Cubit. And The Stand is Stephen King's basically post-apocalyptic novel about a virus that decimates the human population and destroys human society. And it's about the survivors basically just surviving at first as we gradually get introduced to the characters as the virus is killing people and destroying society. And then they sort of gradually form little groups, and then they eventually form these two factions that end up going to kind of like semi-religious war with each other. And as often happens with Stephen King, it's really focused on character development and really character driven. And as I was telling both you guys, Parker and Dusty, I think it's even though it's probably, this one is probably one of my top 3 favorite Stephen King novels, although it might not be my absolute favorite. I think I might like it slightly more, or perhaps Bag of Bones, but it's been a long time since I've read the latter. But I think it's definitely, to me, my favorite Stephen King book in terms of the characters. I think it has the best characters, and we were talking about that before too. And it's probably one of my top 3 or top 5 books in terms of characters, just in general too. I can only think of maybe 1 or 2 more that might fight against it in that contest. But yeah, so I guess that's the basic summary of it, to keep it as concise as possible. But so yeah, to start off from there, what are your guys' overall thoughts about the novel?
Who wants to go first?
Whichever one of you wants to go.
Sure.
I guess I will, since I'm the one that decided to spill the beans first.
Sure.
Overall, I guess I would say that this novel is a lot about the human spirit in every way of it. And I think that they have a lot of different characters that kind of have the full spectrum of what I guess morality is. So you have the extreme of good, which would be like your Tom Cullen, which is, as we were talking about before the broadcast started, that was the extreme good, and the fact that he had no intellect and he just was complete heart. Then you have Leo, that's a little bit further over to, maybe being kind of sort of towards the evil, but like still mostly good. Then you have all the other characters that kind of like encompass the totality of the individual kind of like forms of good and evil. I would even say that Mother Abigail kind of goes even a little bit further to the evil side than even Tom Cullen, because I think that he was the extreme good in the novel. Then you have your extreme evil of the novel, which is the Dark Man. And I would say that next to the extreme evil of the Dark Man would definitely have to be Trash Can Man. He was like, he had little wisps of evil, but like the Dark Man being, or Randall Flagg being, the absolute epitome of evil. I think that was also interesting. But I thought that it was interesting that even in the extreme versions, you had little points of humanity, like the fact that Randall Flagg was kind of afraid of his destiny, and he came from a point of fear even towards the end of the novel.
Yeah, and we see that more towards the end of the novel too, which is really interesting.
Yeah, and I thought that was interesting, that even at the most extreme ends of evil, the human spirit or fear, and a lot of actions, a lot of anger, a lot of everything comes from fear. A lot of people think that every negative sort of connotation of life comes from fear. So it was interesting to me that the absolute epitome of evil even had fear towards the end. And that was the ultimate thing that Randall felt at the end, was a feeling of fear. So I just thought the spectrum of everybody, and like I said, there's all kinds of different forms of it that were more extreme evil and less extreme evil. But I thought that it was an interesting novel in the fact that it explored the full spectrum of what in every individual human, how evil you can actually be, and even the epitome of evil could be relatable.
And and how you can be redeemed too, like how some of the characters, they have a really interesting character arc, like Larry Underwood, for example. He basically ends up being a totally redeemed character, and then it's almost in a way as if him having been flawed before kind of helps him maintain his status of having having had some personal transformation, because he's like constantly thinking about, oh, this is what I would do before, I shouldn't do that, right?
Yeah, I think that that's a big part of it too. I think the full execution of the spectrum is actually within that as well, because Larry was kind of the. I mean, I think I felt the closest to Larry in the fact that he always had the internal struggle of today I can choose to be a piece of shit or I can choose to be a better person, and he always had that constant struggle. I felt he was the most relatable of all the characters due to the fact that he dealt with that on a day to day basis. I felt that essentially all of the people that were further and closer to the point of evil, you have, like, I guess the most relatable as far as I can think, as far as a man would go. And we were talking about even some of the metaphors for the different levels of becoming a man earlier as well. I would say Harold. Harold is probably the easiest one to go. I could easily go. I think that actually the two characters that were like the good that was the most relatable for most people and the most accessible would probably be Harold for evil, and it would have to be what the character we were just talking about, Underwood.
Yeah,
Yeah, Larry Underwood. Larry Underwood, he was probably the most relatable as far as the good goes because he was always battling, and Harold was kind of like the exact opposite of Larry in the fact that he always had choices to be better, but he never chose to be better. And
yeah,
even when he was being better, it was under the guise of trying to do the ultimate worst if he could. If he could make things worse, that was where it came from with almost all of his actions. And he never saw the flaw in that. And that was kind of like the funniest thing. It was like if you feed into these lesser emotions that you even in yourself kind of know are these less than appropriate or less than advantageous actions, then you're going little steps towards evil. It's kind of like what Jordan Peterson says. It's like the road to hell is paved with little steps, is not paved with anything big. And we see that those characters kind of suffered the most. The
it's
ones that had the little forms of going towards evil suffered the
yeah,
most. The ones that were just kind of entrenched just had a quick end. But the
yeah,
ones that were the creeping the closest towards, and I'm thinking mostly about Nadine and Harold. Those two characters, they crept and did it slowly, incrementally, and they had, I believe, two of the worst deaths in the entire novel.
yeah, for sure. And you can see that, like you mentioned Jordan Peterson, in terms of the like the progression into evil. Sort of, it reminds me of that book called Ordinary Men that he's mentioned before, about how the Nazis during, oh, it looks like Dusty just got kicked out. Hopefully he'll be back in a sec. um it's about how the, I actually haven't read it, but I know that it's about the Nazis during World War II, and how people would like gradually progress into being evil Nazis. Basically, like they'd start off with, I don't know, something like just rounding up Jews and just putting them in a prison or something like that. And then later on, maybe they try to convince you to like beat someone up or something like that. And then maybe later on, eventually they get you to shoot someone, and maybe eventually several steps later you're fucking putting babies in a gas chamber or some shit like that. And yeah, in terms of Harold and Nadine, that's a really good point too, because they have like similar to Larry Underwood, as you were talking about, they have sort of like similar moral choices to make, and they go in the opposite direction and sort of serve their self-interest more. And Harold is like, when he feels betrayed, when Stu and Francine, or Stu and Franny finally get together, he like pretends to be okay with it, and then he kind of like turns into a sociopath basically, and he's writing like fucked up shit in his journal about how being selfish is good and it's good for the world. And then they decide to ally themselves with the Dark Man, who everyone is having dreams about, and they decide to accept him and go towards him instead of allying with Mother Abigail, who's like on the opposite end of the religious spectrum. She's like on the side of God, so to speak, and uniting with that group. And then Nadine, of course, is similar in that she sort of I guess it's sort of revealed about her character that she was a school teacher before, and she's sort of been like, she's been perpetually a virgin. And I forget how old exactly she is, but she's like, I'm guessing she's like maybe in her 30s or something like that, or maybe late 30s perhaps.
30s, around like 35.
Yeah, maybe something like that. And then she thinks that she is bringing this kid. She names him Joe when he's with her. She kind of has it in her head that she's eventually going to bring him to the Dark Man. And then, as we were talking about before, her and Harold end up kind of like working together and basically setting up a bomb that bombs the council and kills some people and injures others. And then Franny, of course, is the only reason she gets this intuition that she decides to follow that prevents them from, prevents more people from getting killed and injured, which is another interesting theme in the novel about how like the importance of trusting your intuitions. Basically, like, people ignore their intuitions sometimes, and then bad things happen, and then if they follow their intuitions, they avoid worse things from happening, which is really interesting. And then part of the aspect of Harold's character in terms of Nadine also is like his temptation, because he's a virgin too, and he's like barely a man, probably still technically a teenager, and she's really hot, and she's like, I'll do anything sexually, I just won't fuck you, but we can do all these other dirty sexual things. The Dark Man is okay with that, and then eventually I'll be his wife, and will basically join his team, and everything will be all good.
And I felt that was a metaphor in itself too, because it was like the feeding into the lower self as being a man, and especially since that is kind of childish, it's kind of like following somebody just for mere physical pleasure. It's a short-lived kind of thing. And what I thought was interesting about the fact that Nadine and Harold had found each other was that they both found each other in this good place. So it's almost like you almost think that no evil can come, but it's almost like, as you were talking about with Ordinary Men before, which is actually one of my favorite books as well. Ordinary Men, they talk about how the incremental kinds of steps of, and it wasn't necessarily the Nazis, it was the Nazi police force, and the Nazi police
SS.
Yeah, the reason why they had chosen them was because they hadn't been in the Hitler Youth. They weren't any indoctrinated kind of group. They were old enough to have their own mental cognitions about things and to not necessarily be just grown up in Nazi Germany, because that was a lot of the SS. They were saying a lot of the Nazi youth were, a lot of the Hitler youths, they grew up and then they became SS officers. So they were basically indoctrinated into this whole thing. They had no chance to basically think anything else. Well, you can't say that with the officers that are being talked about, because they were essentially just doing what they were told, but they did it, and they had another moral compass outside of that of Nazi Germany, and they still did what was, morally indefensible anyway, but they did it for this form of camaraderie. But that's neither here nor there.
That's a good point that ties into those themes really well as you were talking about, I think. Yeah.
Well, and that kind of leads into, I shouldn't have said neither here nor there, because that kind of leads into Nadine and Harold's ultimate codependence towards their road to hell.
Mm-hmm.
They incrementally knew, and I think they knew within one another, that they could have always had a chance to go back. As a matter of fact, I found Harold to be really repugnant in the fact that, like, I journal myself. So journaling is another form of thinking. So he really had time to think. He really could have. And I've written down some horrible things about people too. And you go like, wow, you read it back and you go, wow, that was just really hateful. Maybe I shouldn't have that be my life. But instead of doing that, he contemplated that and he said, that's what I want. That's what I need. And that's what makes it awful. And the same thing goes with Nadine. Nadine did, and I thought that it was brilliant that they kind of had the childish form of male evil and the childish form of female evil. And the fact that she was like, well, I tried to get with Larry, who turns out to be the good guy. But, for those that haven't read the book, there's a point in which Nadine is being, for lack of a better phrase, a tease. And she's always going around and she's always tempting Larry. And you can even tell that there's something within her that, like, even likes Larry, but she kind of knows that he's good. And the fact that he's a good kind of makes him seem a little repugnant to her, or like she's for this, she knows it's a dark purpose and she knows that it's not a good purpose, but she uses her female mores to kind of like be, or her female influence to kind of be this everlasting form of desire that nobody can ever partake in except for this supreme dark figure. But even she knows that her being this tease and everything is doing nothing but causing everybody pain, but she can't not do that. It's kind of like the choice that I believe a lot of women have, especially young women have, as far as, okay, like, I know that I have this desire that all of these people might have for me, but do I use this to essentially pull out resources from people? Like she essentially did with everybody except for the Dark Man. And even at the end, she pulled out a resource from him and forced him and forced him to be so angry with her, and not even really forced him, but got him so angry with her that he eventually, tosses her, spoiler, kills her. Yeah. And that was her ultimate goal in the first place. That was what was so crazy about it. It was like she always got what she wanted. She always got what she wanted. She was so beautiful. She always got what she wanted. But in the end, because she had no direction and she knew that what she was doing was an awful thing, she eventually succumbed to the fact that she was, so beautiful, and she died. And she died with this everlasting tease that never had even her own sexual desire fulfilled. She just became this totem of ultimate evil and ultimate desire. And she ultimately became a totem of what is foul in this world. And I believe that I'm not saying that every woman does that, but that's something that I can easily see, like young women that, pull the trigger of, I'm just so desirable and I just want to pull out resources without ever giving any love. I can definitely see how that could be the form of evil that could be done for any young lady,
Yeah, it's like it's like one of it's sort of like how you were talking about how it's kind of one of the female archetypes, how they're both male and female archetypes within the story, as you were talking about. Oh, it looks like Dusty's back there now. Everything all good, Dusty?
Yeah, it was just an unstable internet connection.
Oh, okay. Is that is your avatar a picture moving of one of the swords from Wheel of Time?
Yeah, it's a Wheel of Time, one of the little monograms at the beginning of each chapter.
Oh, that's cool. We were talking, when you got kicked out a couple of those times, we were basically just talking about the characters of Nadine and Harold.
Yeah, they're some pretty weird characters. Of course, Harold has this, I don't know what it is, but when we meet him, since all of the other male competition is gone, he tries to call dibs on Franny.
Yeah.
Things don't go his way, and then he just gets really resentful. But the weird thing about him is that he kind of becomes like this weird sociopath who has like a facade of always smiling, but underneath it all, he's just extremely resentful and has like these resentful thoughts about his position. Like I remember when they were doing their voting, and surprisingly enough, he was voted. He was not voted as leader, and he got really kind of upset about that, which was strange, considering like he tried to be a leader. If you remember when they were when it was just her and Franny and a couple other people, and then when Stu came in, that's when things started going haywire for Harold.
Yeah, I think it's like you mentioned him being a sociopath. I mentioned that too. It's like how his rejection, he basically uses that to feed into his ego complex more. And it reminds me too, like in terms of what we were discussing a little bit, the choices that Harold and Nadine make and how they're similar to some of the choices that the other characters make, but they go in the opposite direction. Like Larry Underwood, for example, he's a character who becomes redeemed, and he's always thinking about his past to kind of use it as like armor to reinforce his reformed self in a way. Like he's always thinking about what he was like at the beginning of the novel when he was this kind of washed up rock star, and all he cared about was like doing drugs and partying and shit. And then he eventually like finds a girlfriend and becomes devoted to her and like her future child, and helps set up a new society and develops a leadership position and develops trust with people. So instead of like uniting with Nadine in their hatred as Harold and Nadine do, Larry Underwood unites with people by trying to form a new society, and that's like that's one of the differences that you were mentioning, Parker, between like people who join Mother Abigail's like positive religious side of the society, sort of, and then people who join the Dark Man, who are generally more focused on self-interest and destroying things than creating and building new like positive societies.
Well, the weird thing about the Dark Man's society is I don't like considering the viewpoint of the characters, like some of the ones that go over to his side. His society doesn't seem all that appealing because there's no drug use. It's very strict and authoritarian. It's like, what's the appeal?
Yeah.
I don't get it. I don't get why anyone would want to cross over there. Yeah, they're in Vegas, but they stripped all the fun out of Vegas, so it's not like you're going anywhere any more fun. But it's really weird. It was strictly like authoritarian. They had like
think
if you go ahead.
I think some of it is loyalty through fear, because everyone fears him, right? But it doesn't necessarily make you like that in particular doesn't necessarily mean that you'll go towards him in the first place. Like I think some of it, especially the way that the Dark Man manipulates Trash Can Man, he's like basically saying you can come and live with me and do whatever you want, basically, and go and hunt and search for weapons and explosives and set off fires and stuff. But I mean, then again, he has more freedom than pretty much anyone else in the Dark Man society. So I think he does do that also to.
Yeah, that's probably why. Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say that was probably why Trash Can Man ends up becoming like one of the Flagg's adversaries in a way, because you have to remember he goes to a base and just completely fucks it up because people were talking shit about him.
Yep.
like he's valuable, but he also is more free spirited and is given more free will than most every other person in Randall Flagg's community.
And I think it also comes down to the fact that he was kind of the ultimate and the most loyal of all of Flagg's, followers, and he ended up destroying himself. So I think that was also kind of a metaphor for, if you follow the path of evil, you're ultimately leading to the path of self-destruction, because he thought that his ultimate thing was, even when he did bring that nuke to the base and he destroyed everything, he had thought that he was doing the ultimate will of the ultimate evil, but he didn't even know that it was evil. He was too far gone to even have any real understanding of what a barometer is of morality in the first place. So if you lose that barometer in the first place, you can kind of become evil, and you will think that that's for the greater good. But even that, it's so chaotic, and you have to be so entrenched in so much negativity that you don't know what's going on, that it ultimately becomes what happened, which is, the nuke, and it becomes like, this imploding kind of thing. It's almost like a tragedy. It's like what Shakespeare considered a tragedy was being destroyed by your own greatness. So he had all of this intellect. As a matter of fact, it was kind of like Trash Can Man was the exact opposite of Tom Cullen, and the fact that Tom Cullen was all complete understanding of the world through just his heart and just this general like curiosity that was childlike. And Trash Can Man, his whole view of the world was nothing but pain, and was nothing but resentment, and was nothing but this upside down view of everything. So he didn't know what was good, what was bad, what was anything. All he knew was pain. So everything that he did, even if it felt like it was quote unquote good, was from a point of pain, instead of being from a point of anything that could be joy or anything that could be pure at all.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, that's interesting too, because if you look at like the to compare and contrast between the sort of good and evil sides again, if you look at like the religious purpose and mission that Mother Abigail talks about, if you compare like the loyalty of Trash Can Man and what it leads to the loyalty of Tom Cullen and Stu, for example, and then Larry Underwood, and I forget who else came with him to infiltrate the Dark Man's group. I think maybe one of them was Glenn, who's that sociologist guy, if I remember
The
correctly.
professor? I don't remember his name, but the one of them was like an older professor.
Yeah. But yeah, like their
Judge, I think it was the
loyalty
judge,
to
right?
like the good, like Mother Abigail's basically like purpose driven by God, like the positive religious example, basically. Like Larry Underwood and everyone else who went there ended up dying, but then of course Tom Cullen ends up saving Stu, and which allows him to come back eventually and be the father to Franny's child in their new society. And it's interesting too, because like we were talking about the sort of theme of how Tom Cullen's character is driven by heart rather than intellect, and it's another thing to do with that is that the Dark Man, he has this like evil third eye kind of, where he can like travel metaphysically, like almost have his soul go and spy on people, which is how he knows so much about what the other side is doing. But he can't find Tom with that. Like when he finds out that there are people from the other group coming to infiltrate his society, he can't see Tom Cullen, and it almost seems like it seems like there's at least a really strong implication that Stephen King is putting there, that Tom Cullen, he can't be detected by the Dark Man because he is driven by heart. So it's like he's even more pure than the other like supposedly good people on the good side of the struggle.
Yeah, I think the reason why he was chosen in the first place, and I think that's why both Trash Can Man and Tom were kind of chosen as being the, if you look at them the closest to the absolutes of good and evil, because they were kind of both mentally deficient, but in different ways. So Tom was all, like, as we said, he was all driven by heart. He was driven completely by his will of God. And he always had these different insights that were deeper than anybody else's, deeper than anybody else's. And he was drawn to nothing but even the good within people. I mean, that was, even when he was in the other society, other people enjoyed having him be around when he went west to Vegas, because they were like, he saw the good even within the evil society. That was what made him absolutely like beautiful, and people liked him. I believe that the fact that Tom had come, he became the biggest infiltrator, and the fact that he changed a lot of minds. Because remember, towards the end, a lot of people were trying to move away from the Dark Man. I believe if Tom hadn't been around and they hadn't seen that there was this goodness, because that was the biggest thing that I also thought was interesting. Everybody had a choice. Everybody had two visions. Some people had stronger visions from one side, depending on what their personality was, but they all had visions and they all had a choice that they could go. And there was a little bit of good and evil. There was no absolute. Every society had a bit of gray area. As a matter of fact, even in the good society, remember, that's why Stu had to become a sheriff, because they were getting a few things that were less than good that were happening. So it wasn't this like carte blanche, everything is good here and everything is evil over there. You still had to deal with alcoholism. You still had to deal with the regular things of society. It was just the center point of what was in people's hearts might have been more drawn towards good or more drawn towards evil, or whichever vision they wanted to go more deeply into.
Yeah, for sure. I was just thinking too about you and I were talking the other day, Dusty, about the character of Nick, and how along with Larry Underwood and some others, for the first part of the novel, it seems like Nick is at least one of the main protagonists, and he becomes a really important character in helping form Mother Abigail's new society. And that's another interesting too. It's similar to Tom Cullen in a way, in that like he leads with his heart, and his disability, like his lack of intelligence and his like mental retardation, is sort of his strength in a way. And it's sort of like it's sort of similar with Nick, in that he's deaf and mute, but then he ends up having this leadership position, and then he of course ends up being not only deaf and mute, but deaf and mute and blind in one eye, because he gets shot or somehow injured by that guy he's having a struggle with, and then he develops this leadership position, and it's like people respect his integrity, even though they have to communicate with him by him writing things down, which is, I think that's it's interesting to compare Nick and Tom Cullen for that reason.
Well, we know Nick has to read lips and whatnot, and then before he even gets to Colorado, we're shown that he has integrity, because one, he befriends Tom and he pretty much cares for him. I know there's like a part that gets pretty rocky where he enters that town, and there's this one kind of unhinged lady, and she wants to jump his bones, and Nick kind of lashes out there by I think he points a gun at her, right? Like tells her to get lost. And she was like, there was a part where he was more upset about her messing with Tom than anything else. Because there was this part where she was trying to seduce him while he was looking for some food, and then he was like, no, I'm all right. And then she starts going off on Tom, and he gets really upset about that. But we're shown that he is a really selfless type of person, where he's sticking up for this guy that can't protect himself very much in the world that they're living in now.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well said.
Yeah, I remember that exact scene, and he had a tummy ache. Tom had had a tummy ache, and it was Julie. That was the name of her,
Right.
Julie, and her last name started with an L. But she was a minor character. But I thought that was interesting too, in the fact that almost the way that Harold was corrupted was the exact thing that Nick had actually resisted. He had kind of gone into the divinity of himself. And he's like, yeah, I could have this woman that's around, and like all she will be useful for to me is, I remember that she had like, she was very vacuous, didn't have a lot to say. And you could just kind of go, well, yeah, like I could just use this woman to just sleep with because she's always down to sleep with me. But he was like, that's not even good. Like she told this feeble-minded person, that being Tom Cullen, that something that was going to help him and he had a stomach ache was going to be poison to him. And that was when he made that final decision where he's like, okay, you know what? Like, I want to see the good in people, but like, that's just kind of evil in general. And once that happened, it was kind of like, I just like the theme of people that had deficiencies were the most pure of heart. That was the biggest theme that I had, which was like, you have to be a better person because you have to rely on other people more so. I think that was kind of a theme in general too.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good point. That goes back to the theme of people going in directions because they make different choices. I didn't think about that comparison between Nick and Harold in terms of that, but yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of the things that I found interesting about the book where if you go through, you can see the choices and you can see right when almost everybody is, okay, this dude's going to be ultimately good or this person's going to be ultimately evil. Like Larry Underwood, the entire time, everything leading up. I remember my first run through of this book, I was like, he's going to be evil. He's going to be evil. I remember thinking that extra hard. I'm like, this dude, like, he doesn't have anything good. And you think that all the way up until around, the end of the first book. But at the end of the first book, you're like, all right, it's settled who's evil, who's not evil. But towards the middle, I liked how there was all this kind of development and everybody had different choices that you could make on how you deal with everything. And then there were even gray areas with the good people. Like I still think that a brilliant point was to have Stu kill the guard that came in to kill him when all the shit goes down within the first book. When he's getting all the tests and everything, and then finally that one dude comes in to like cap him, and it was like, is it evil to murder somebody? That's the first thing. There's a lot of biblical things. I mean, they have so many biblical things it's hard to even count. Like one of the biblical things is Franny's baby, like living throughout all of this, and then you have like Joseph, or you have the father of Jesus as well that you could kind of go with as far as Stu going and having to be a righteous man and fathering a child that isn't his. But you also have a lot of the biblical things that kind of fall on their head. Like Stu is a good man, and he ultimately becomes like, the ultimate father of the new Messiah of the new world in Franny's baby. But he killed a man. That's something that haunts him throughout the book, but it was kind of necessary. And it's like, yo, does that make you evil in the fact that you did that? Did you want to do it? Like there's all of these different things. And it's like they did things that even the evil side did, but they did it for a different purpose. It makes you wonder all the time about like, is there a flat action or is there actually like something deeper? There's something bigger than that with all actions, even if it seems like it's simplistic. You can't just look at it as one action like that.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, for sure. And that makes me think too about how the Mother Abigail as a character, and how like it's sort of similar to what happens with the other characters where they go in different directions and you think the novel is going to focus on them more, but then they die and it focuses on other characters. It's interesting that Mother Abigail is like she's seen as the leader of that one new society, and you sort of think that she's going to be like the perpetual leader until the end of the book, and then she ends up dying like maybe halfway through or like 2/3 through or so, and then it's just the Dark Man who's the main evil protagonist who's left over. So then the other characters like Stu and Larry and others, of course, they have to sort of take on the void of the leadership role that Mother Abigail left over. And it's interesting how she goes on this sort of religious vision quest, I guess you could call it, as happens in the Bible. Of course, sometimes just going on a journey to find what God thinks her purpose is, basically. And she comes back, and then she knows who has to go to infiltrate the Dark Man's society, and who has to stay. She doesn't know what's going to happen, but she knows what's supposed to happen. And I was thinking also too about what you mentioned earlier, Parker, about how how Tom Cullen ends up being like even more of a divine character than Mother Abigail. What do you mean by that?
I mean, the whole purpose behind Mother Abigail, from what I could gather, was she was just the gathering stick. And I mean, the whole reason why she leaves and the whole reason why she fasts and she goes on a pilgrimage is because she ultimately did ascend. She sinned when Tom himself did not. She had pride and thought people were actually coming to see her, when in fact it was all a will of God. So she had more pride than even Tom did. Tom was the ultimate. He was the only one that, of all the characters, didn't question. Like, for instance, when Franny goes, "Fuck God," and I was like, whoa. Like, who says that? The only person that had no doubt throughout the entirety, and there were so many reasons to doubt God. There were so many reasons to doubt God. The only person that went like, "Yo, you asked me to do this. It's God's will. It's whatever," was Tom. He was hypnotized, but he always said that. Nobody else did. Everybody else had questions in their heart. Everybody else was scared. The only person that really walked truly with God throughout that entire book and was truly good the entire time, had nothing to repent for, was Tom.
And that sort of relates back to how he leads with his heart, because he can't lead with his intellect, which is really
Would you call
interesting too.
Tom a divine savant?
Yeah, well said. Yeah, that's a perfect way of putting it. Yeah.
And the trash can man, in his own way, was an intellectual savant. He was all completely, he knew how to technically do everything. He had no reasoning behind it, but he knew how to technically do everything. Tom knew technically how to do nothing, but he was open to everything. He was open to whatever beauty there was. So he was a savant in the way that he could seek out absolute divinity, whereas Trash Can Man could seek out absolute chaos and was encouraged to do so.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a good comparison too.
What about Lloyd? Because Lloyd is a very conflicted character in this book.
Yeah, that's true.
Like,
Lloyd to me represents not taking responsibility for any of your actions, because everything he did was not his fault. He kills people. He kills people in a convenience store. It was Poke's fault. He is stuck inside of this jail cell, not because he killed somebody following Poke, but because there were people that were always after him. It wasn't his fault that he did anything. It was the Dark Man's fault. He was just following orders. He was the person that like kind of makes you angry the most, in the fact that they're like, I have no power, but he had like ultimate power and everything. And as a matter of fact, he was a tyrannical force. So I thought he was kind of the lack of responsibility, the evils of not taking responsibility for your action in almost everything.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's another, like, to go back to the major theme of just making different choices, which lead to opposite directions and lead to you allying with one group over the other. Yeah, that's a really good point in terms of him. It's like how like the other characters, the opposite, they look at it, the similar issues in the opposite way, like Larry Underwood and Stu and Nick for example, and all the other kind of leaders on Mother Abigail's side, they're like all about personal responsibility, really, and that's sort of what motivates them to be the side that they're on. And that's, as we sort of alluded to earlier, that's one of the things that's the opposite of what leads people to the Dark Man's society. They all seem to kind of have ego complexes.
So when you said like
Yeah,
personal responsibility, would you consider like that area like Abigail's Gulch or something?
What do you mean?
I guess you didn't get the reference. So Galt's Gulch, Abigail's Gulch.
I'm confused.
Because you're saying that everyone takes personal responsibility in the Colorado, like they
Yeah.
all pitch in to do their thing. It's kind of like this idealized society, but an actual, I think, more realistic version of society than you would say Galt's Gulch, if you compare the two.
What's Galt's Gulch?
Man, are you serious? It's freaking Atlas Shrugged. Jesus.
Oh, John Galt. Oh, yeah, like his anarcho-capitalist utopia. Yeah, for sure. That's a really good point. Yeah. Yeah,
So
that's a
that's what
really
I'm
good
saying.
point.
It's Abigail's Gulch. She got her own thing going on.
Yeah, and it seems to work a lot better.
Well, it
but
seems to be more realistic because you got this. The thing is, I think that makes her thing work is that everyone finds some type of meaning. So I guess one of the first things that they do is they try to clean up all the dead bodies, right, all over town. And I know what's his name volunteers for that duty, but it's like really important that they clean everything up and
Is it
get
Harold?
everything back to normal.
it is Harold.
Yeah, it is Harold.
Harold, yeah, he
Yeah.
becomes one of those. Yeah, he becomes one of the body cleanup guys, and I don't know why particular he does that. Because Harold's supposed to be like he doesn't have. He considers himself intellectual, but he doesn't have many other skills. Because he's a writer, right? Or he purports himself to be a writer.
Yeah.
And as far as like practical skills outside of that, he's sorely lacking. So he has to volunteer to do corpse removal duty. And then we do see some other people who are more skilled and have more abilities, like the people who get the power plant running again. But yeah, it looks like that society values and tries to instill meaning in lives and say, hey, your little bit is doing great for everybody.
Yeah, for sure. And I think if I remember correctly, in terms of Harold volunteering to help get rid of the dead bodies, I think I remember there was a part where he was thinking about it, and it was like his sociopathy motivating him. Basically, like he was thinking, well, hey, if I volunteer for the dirtiest job, then that'll earn more respect from them, and that'll make them suspect me less. Or I think that was sort of his line of thinking for behind his motivation for that.
Well, that,
Yeah,
and like, to be honest, like in the beginning of the book, he's just shown as like this flabby kind of um, a flabby, socially awkward guy, and then when they start getting into it, he starts working out or something. I know he sheds the flab, which is interesting because typically you would see some type of increase in self-confidence, and we kind of see the opposite where when it comes to Harold, he becomes less confident in himself and he starts to turn to the dark side.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, I think I mean, it seems like that's primarily, but I mean, there are definitely multiple reasons, but it seems like it's kind of primarily motivated by like when Stu and Franny finally put their their emotions for each other out in the open, and they go together. That because Harold, like, he, even though it was totally unwarranted, he sort of, like, as you were saying earlier, Parker, he sort of like staked his claim for Franny basically, and he felt like betrayed by both Franny and Stu when they ended up together, and that's why he started like acting like a sociopath in the first place, like putting on this fake smile all the time, where he has a smile but he's not smiling with his eyes because he has the psychopath eyes, and it seems like that's when his character starts to like unravel and go towards the dark side, so to speak.
And honestly,
The dark journal.
it was actually Dusty that actually brought up that whole thing about the resentment. But that was kind of the whole point behind Harold in the first place, was the fact that he makes strides, and that was important that Dustin made that connection, that he was actually losing weight, because you think that, you know, you could get confidence, and he always had choices. Every day he had choices to be a little bit better, but instead of being better, instead of looking at the good within his life, he started just looking at nothing but the negative, and he was like, that's what I should feed. As a matter of fact, when he made that ledger, he was like, hate is what you should feed into. That is what it almost reminded me of Star Wars with Emperor Palpatine. Is like, yes, let the hate flow through you. Yeah. And he like did that. He let that. And I thought that was powerful, because I look at like simultaneous metaphors that you have in every great novel or story. And in Star Wars, that's another thing that they have that's kind of a parallel even with this book. He was kind of like the Anakin Skywalker. It was like he always had choices, but he just let his passions go towards the absolute worst way you can interpret everything, because it wasn't the fact that everybody thought he was a loser. As a matter of fact, that was what I thought was brilliant about the way he died. And he called himself by his final, nickname, and the fact that he had use. And it wasn't the fact that other people didn't see that within him. He never saw that within himself. And he fed into that resentment due to the fact that it wasn't the fact that anybody else didn't think that he was useful. It wasn't the fact that even he got mad at the fact that he had confirmation that he kind of felt that Fran didn't like him. But when he got that confirmation externally, that shouldn't have mattered to him. But in his own mind, within the way that he saw himself and what he thought he was to the world. I mean, there's always these allusions to it throughout the book, where it's like there's no way that the world's really going to change. He's still a loser. He's always going to be a loser. And Harold feels that way, not anybody else. So, and as a matter of fact, as when he planted the bomb, people were like, oh, he's actually a good guy, all the way up until he did that whole planting of the bomb and they found the ledger. And that was and even Fran, everybody felt bad because they were like, hey, he's probably a good guy. And he could have been. That was something that was crazy too. Towards the end, he even had in his final words, yeah, I could have been a good guy if I just stayed back in Colorado and just not done this bullshit. But he couldn't see past his own insecurities. And I thought that it was ultimately Harold. There were representations throughout all of the book as far as good and evil. Like, I thought that Larry was supposed to, everyday choices of being good. And I thought that Harold was supposed to be your slow decline into hell due to the fact that you every day, instead of feeding into what was good, because good things happen to him every day, but he didn't feed into any of those. All he did was feed into his resentment. So it's a representation of choices that we all have. And that's why I felt he was kind of the best of all the villains, because he was the most relatable. Because it's like, how many times have you been pulled over, or not pulled over, but you've been cut off, and you're like, yo, at this next stoplight, if I can, I'm going to jump out of this car. I'm going to beat the shit out of this guy. And you really genuinely think that. You think that, you don't do it, but you always have the choice. If you want to, you can just go like, yeah, today's the day, man. I just feel like jumping out of the car and beating the shit out of this guy. And you could do that. There's consequences for that. But then it's also, you got to think about Harold. There were probably always consequences before, but now all of a sudden there's no society, there's no cops. He can do it. And what does he do? He does that shit. That's what's scary about it. And we could all do that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think
One thing I'll say
think,
too
oh, go
about
ahead.
Harold and Nadine, it seems to me that there's also kind of this overall theme about free will and its moral goodness. So if we're talking about Nadine and
Harold?
Harold, they get massively influenced by Randall Flagg, like almost to a level where they no longer have a free will. And this is more so with Nadine. You see this when she approaches Larry and kind of gives him like an ultimatum to have sex with her, because if she doesn't do this, she's going to go to the dark side. Um, it's We can see that these characters ultimately, yes, their choices aren't bad, but a lot of the times we could say, are their choices their choices? Because we can see that Randall Flagg has been meddling with them psychically in some sort of way to
Mm-hmm.
remove that free will. And it's almost like if you take a look at um, like the way that Abigail operates, she gives them a choice. She doesn't tell people what to do. She gives them information, and then they get to decide what to do with that. Randall Flagg just gives people orders. That's all he does. He doesn't give people that choice. So I think that's probably one of the more important themes between like the two societies as well.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good point. I think it's kind of both. Like the Dark Man kind of meddles with them more, but they also kind of listen to him more than other people who have the Dark Man in their dreams. And it's interesting that we're talking about both characters too, because you mentioned, Parker, that Harold is like the ultimate personification of the most identifiable evil character, rather. Like it kind of that makes it interesting that Harold and Nadine are together until Harold dies, at least, and until Nadine eventually ends up with the Dark Man, because I kind of think that Harold is the most identifiable um, male evil character, and Nadine is like the most identifiable female evil character, because she has like the same sorts of choices and she can go in the opposite direction, but she goes towards the dark side instead of towards the light side instead.
And I thought that Nadine and Harold, I thought they got together because they were both kind of the traps of adolescence between men and women, teenage adolescence between men and women. As I was saying with Harold, Harold succumbed to, when you're a teenager, you have perversions. That's just what it is. Like you start looking at girls and you start going like, yeah, that's what I want. And he succumbed to that to the point that that became his obsession. That became the ultimate goal. He was willing to give up everything to just have his perversions done. And the same thing with Nadine. As I was saying earlier, Nadine is the sin of, the young woman that knows that people will give up all of these resources for her, but will not give anything in return. Like she's always has the looming of, you can have my body over everything, but you can't really have it. That's for the ultimate evil purpose. But it's kind of like, well, if you're not willing to give it to anybody of this world and you want to save yourself for this ultimate evil, like, and you're taking from people because you know that they want this resource that you're always looming over people's heads, how evil is that in itself? And I don't know. I'm not a woman, so I don't know how evil that is. I don't know how strong that pull is. I know the evil of Harold. I know that evil within myself because I've been a man my entire life, but I don't know what it's like as a woman, but I imagine it would probably be something similar. And I thought that was brilliant that as a man, Stephen King could write that and could kind of see that as a, I guess, not even a flaw, but that could be a temptation that young people could have within both men and women, and how that was very individualized within both Nadine and Harold, as far as, the ultimate evil of young women and the ultimate evil of young men, respectively.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, for sure. they give into that temptation, whereas other characters, like especially Larry Underwood, as we mentioned before, because like it's almost as if because he's given into temptation so many times before, he's tempted by it, but then he eventually overcomes his urge to give in to the temptation, and then he sort of overcomes that. And you can see where if he hadn't gone through that character development, he probably would have ended up on the side of the Dark Man too. So that's interesting as well.
And actually, now that you say that, I realized that Franny was the ultimate good of young women. So I believe that Larry Underwood was the opposite. Because think about it like this: you have Larry Underwood, who finally becomes a man when he learns to be faithful to one woman. He learns to take care of not just himself, but just everybody that's within his community. Like, it's kind of very Jordan Peterson-esque, if you think about it. He learns to take care of himself first, then he learns to take care of other people in his community, and he learns to be faithful to one person. Whereas you have Harold, who had no self-confidence to take care of anybody, not even himself. He ultimately ends up destroying a woman that he doesn't even really love or anything like that. And he takes away energy from everybody instead of adding, like Larry did. Then you have Fran Goldsmith, who, as opposed to Nadine, she makes a mistake and does give up her body. And it is seen as being this horrible thing at first. Her parents, nobody likes the fact that she's pregnant. She even sometimes questions it, but she did. She gave in to love, in loving somebody, not just one person. She loved the original dude, and she also loved Stu later on. So she did exactly what Nadine didn't do. She actually allowed herself to be vulnerable enough to love somebody and let somebody in. And she didn't always leave this. As a matter of fact, with Harold became bitter because she never teased him. She went, yo, you ain't got any chance with me from the start. And he felt it. Everybody felt it. She was honest all the way through. Nadine had no honesty within her at all.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's a really good point too. That Nadine and Franny are kind of opposites in that way, in the similar way too. As we were talking about how Larry and Harold are kind of opposites in the same way, and how Tom and Trash Can Man are kind of opposites in the same way.
Yeah, I don't know who Lloyd Reed's actual opposite is. Like, maybe, like, Dustin, do you have any? Because I just started noticing those parallels. It's kind of like you start noticing like the Legion of Doom and like the Justice League. You know what I'm saying? Like, when you look at both of them, it's like, yo, okay, so you got Solomon Grundy, and that's like Superman's dude, and you got like these other, and I'm like trying to find out who it is. But who do you think that Lloyd's opposite would be?
Yeah, what do you think, Dusty? You still there?
Oh boy.
Uh-oh.
Never mind. Oh, then I'll just ask you.
I'm having some robotic issues.
Oh, okay. Are you there now, though? I guess he's having a little...
I'm here, but I'm mobile, so I'm hopping in between different Wi-Fi spots. So what happens is I get near one router, it cuts on, and then it gets a little bit robotic for a little while, and then a minute later it connects to some other Wi-Fi spot. So
okay.
It's I just need to run through this building real quick.
Okay.
Well, then I'll ask you, Andrew, who do you think Lloyd's opposite would be then?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Well, if
Stu.
I guess Stu? Yeah, I guess you could say that. Yeah.
Yes, probably Stu. Probably Stu.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I like I said, Franny had hers, and then I'm like Glenn. I don't know who Glenn and Ralph, but they all had. I noticed that there was just, it was like Bizarro World over in Vegas. everybody had, and I mean everybody had an opposite. Like even the Julie, the minor character of Julie, I believe the Joe was her opposite.
Oh yeah, that's interesting.
Julie was, yeah, the vacuous girl that had nothing to say, but like was always talking about sex. Like she fed into nothing but just like the fantasy world. Joe was closer to the divine, but Joe was kind of thought of as being kind of insane, and the fact that he lost his mind and he became kind of murderous for a second. And I believe that Julie became kind of, I guess you would say she became insatiable as far as what her off kilter thing was, but she fed more into the Dark Man's plot because, like I said, everybody had choices. And Julie, I believe that she had a divinity to her too, but it was more geared towards the Dark Man. Like she was just a chaotic figure that did nothing but distract.
Yeah, and that's interesting too. Like in terms of choices and what they're drawn to. Joe, he could have ended up being on the side of the Dark Man too, especially because Nadine was sort of like grooming him to end up with her and the Dark Man. But then when they get to Mother Abigail's society, he instantly is drawn toward Mother Abigail, and then he goes towards the good side, and then Larry and I forget that woman who's his girlfriend's name, but he ends up being taken care of by them instead of Nadine, basically, and she also sort of abandons him in a way, right?
Yeah, and it was Lucy. Lucy is who got with
Right.
Harry,
Right.
and yeah, they become. I mean, that was another thing about the, I guess, fallacy of young women too, as far as the evils of young women with Nadine. I saw, which was the ultimate abandonment, which she abandoned everything. She abandoned all responsibilities. She became the ultimate taker. She took everything. She was like, hey, I need a way to get to the Dark Man. I don't care about your life, Harold. I know I have a choice in which I could just, stay here with you and we could not do this, but I'm going to take this from you. And it's like, and she took energy from Joe or, Leo, whichever one you want to call him, Joe or Leo, Leo towards the end. She took him and she basically went, well, I need to be needed. So let me take your energy. And now that, you don't need me anymore, I don't need you, which is, when you think about that and you think about that as a child, think about like, I know I'm 32 years old, but if my parents went like, you're a grown ass man, I don't give a shit about you anymore, I would be like, I could deal with that. But at the same time, that's not a nice or a kind thing to say to anybody that, you had taken care of for a long time. So I think that even that was part of the completeness of her losing her humanity.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, well said.
And Andrew, what do you think about Trash Can Man taking a gun barrel up the tailpipe?
That was fucked up. I don't know why I'm smiling about it, but that was one of the fucked up parts where he gets raped by a gun.
I actually
It's so
think
fucked.
he's the most tragic character in the book because he basically had the worst life. Pre-pandemic, he had the worst life. And the reason he was so loyal is because Randall Flagg saw that he could instill some type of meaning in him. He's like, he just got raped. He's traveling with a maniac, and Randall Flagg comes to his rescue. And he's finally found somebody that has an interest in him that's trying to protect him. Like the guy had, what was he? He was like through foster care. He just had a horrible upbringing. But I think out of all the characters, like at least Stephen King does like a really good job at giving that character a reason to trust Randall Flagg so completely.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like like in terms of like characters being flawed and making different decisions. That's one of the ways too where well, there are sides, there are good and evil sides, and there are clearly defined good and evil characters, since they make different decisions, and since they're motivated by different things. You could, and they have their flaws. You can see that there's not just this clear dichotomy of good and evil. It's sort of more like a yin and yang symbol in a way. The good has a little bit of evil in it, and the evil has a little bit of good in it, in a way. And that, like, that reminds me too. I was just thinking about how we should talk about the Dark Man more, because he's such a fucking great villain. And one of the interesting aspects that we talked about, we mentioned briefly earlier, is how, especially towards the end of the book, you experience more of his thoughts, and you experience more of his doubt and even his fear of the good characters and Mother Abigail and what might happen, and how he ends up dying suddenly. And there's and like he has such interesting supernatural powers too. Like they're not crazy over the top for the most part, but there are a few where you like can see him turning into a demon, and where he's meditating and levitating, and he's doing all that, and he's doing like crazy supernatural shit sometimes. And my favorite part of the book is what you asked me about the other day, Dusty, that sort of Deus ex machina, or however you pronounce that ending, where right at the end, where Stu finally gets back to Franny with the help of Tom Collins saving his life. The very ending of the book after that is this little scene. It's sort of a flashback from earlier with Randall Flagg, and it relates to how Randall Flagg, a.k.a. the Dark Man, has all these different names, and several of them are just like different versions of the initials RF. And it's sort of like I was saying, it's so cool how it sort of ties all the threads together, and it gives it more of like a mythological or religious feel too. It's like it's like Randall Flagg is just like the latest incarnation of pure evil or something, and he's like an ethereal character that always has to be there. It's like the good always has to be balanced by the evil, which is it's almost like Randall Flagg was like that rendition of, or that version of evil was almost destined to die when Mother Abigail died, because the good being the most good character at the time dying has to be balanced by the most evil character dying. But then you kind of get the sense at the end of the book that he's going to come back, and there's always going to be this religious struggle between good and evil. And it makes you sort of think at the end of the novel, it's like more likely, like you were talking about the parallels to Jesus earlier, Parker. It's like Franny's child it's almost like he's set up to be the new like personification of good and the divine, or something similar.
Oh yeah, I mean the whole thought process behind the book made me think of yin and yang the entire time. And I thought about, when you have the yin and yang symbol, you have the ultimate good and the ultimate evil. So you could think of that as being Mother Abigail, and that'd be Randall Flagg, and the two dots would be, in the middle are what you could consider to be the closest incarnations of both that are within. So I would say that Larry is kind of like the white dot within the black. And the fact that he originally started out being no nice guy, he ain't no nice guy, being that, but he's in this quagmire of evil, but he brings himself over to good. And then you have Harold, which was, he was ultimately kind of a good kid, flabby, would have probably found his way if things hadn't, he hadn't gone insane with everything happening. And he was kind of the black dot within the white. And he kind of went completely over into the blackness and lost himself. And you could say that with Nadine or Franny or whatever, and take that with any of those characters. And that's why I thought it was brilliant, because it was always like, look, man, you always have choices. And there were tons of different characters from a wide range of different thought processes. And I thought that was like the best. Like, I believe we talked about it before we even started this conversation on the broadcast. What I thought was phenomenal was how the 4 people that they chose as the final to go into the Dark Man's lair, they all, in my opinion, kind of represented the 4 tenets of becoming a man, which you have Larry, who becomes a man because he's becoming a man from being a boy. He had all these childish, selfish ways of doing things, and now he's becoming a man in the fact that he's like, this is ultimate. I'm sacrificing my body. And everybody on this pilgrimage knows they're going to die and they're not going to come back, or they have a feeling. Okay. You have Stu, who is just like ultimate masculinity in the fact that it's like he doesn't think about it a lot, but he just goes, this is a mission. I don't know what's going to happen, but I have to lead these men. I have to lead them because nobody else will. And that's what's bringing him. You've got Glenn, who's an old man, but he's like the voice of wisdom. You need wisdom to get through this life. And then you have Ralph, who, like I said, his personality kind of said more about him than anything else, which was he was kind of like somebody that could figure out problems, but he wasn't really somebody that you could rely on with everything, but he was all heart. He was all heart. It was like whatever happens, all I know is that in the moments when good needs to happen, I know it needs to happen. And those are all, in one way or another, things that you need as not just a man, but I would just say a good person. You need all of those things. And when trouble strikes, you need those 4 things to lead you to the promised land, to get you out, come hell or high water. And they brought those 4 things. And I thought that was a brilliant thing that Stephen King did in bringing that all together towards the end and having those 4 be the chosen 4 to make that pilgrimage. And it was also kind of poetic that they had nothing with them. They just had sleeping bags and they just went, we just walk. We walk this entire trip. All of that was just like, think about how brave. And if you really think about the emotions that they had, knowing and the dread, and how the dread got even deeper, but they kept on going on. I thought that just the description of all of that was just amazing. It's really going into the belly of the beast. And that's what we all need to do to ultimately not just conquer evil, quote unquote, but challenges in general.
Yeah, very well said. Yeah, I wasn't actually, that's a good point. I didn't actually think about those characters in terms of what they represent in that way. But that's interesting too, because one of the things I was thinking about when I was reading it is that it's almost like their devotion to their religious purpose is so important because like their devotion to their religious purpose makes them do something totally irrational, which is basically to just leave Stu when he injures his leg, which is basically leaving him to die, rather than choosing to like drive in a car, which would defy the religious purpose given to them by Mother Abigail. And it's almost like they were supposed to do that, because then he was there when Stu was on his way back, who's the only one who escaped from infiltrating the Dark Man, and he was able to save Stu and get him back to Franny to be the father of her child, which was really interesting.
Yeah, and
the one thing I found, I would say that was disappointing, is that we did not get to see the battle with the sword dude in white and the crow dude with the scythe. Like, I was looking at that cover, I was like, when is this going to happen in the book? When am I going to see this epic sword fight?
Yeah, that's cool. Like, you don't know, if you haven't read the book, that those characters are sort of just metaphorical. They don't actually even exist, obviously, in the novel.
Yeah. I mean, everything in that novel, if you ask me, that it has so many layers. I mean, honestly, like when I really thought about and analyzed the book on a really deep level, once I like looked at it again, you could almost write an entire thesis on it. You could almost make a college class on just the depths of the characters and what the different points represent. I mean, I thought it was brilliant, even in the way that they had, for lack of a better term, cold the fields with Captain Trips and killing everybody off and seeing the ones that were left and seeing just how humanity acted. It almost reminded me of the flood, like the days before the flood and Noah and everything. It was like, yo, man, if you really think about it, people were acting kind of reckless. And the days before the flood, everybody kind of went like, yo, man, we're out here just like being sodomites and doing whatever the fuck we want to. And yeah, you get what you kind of fucking get at that point in time. And the people that were left were, not necessarily who you'd expect, but they had enough of a tabula rasa, blank slate kind of thing that they could be taken by either side. And I thought that was interesting too, because it's kind of like every day you got those choices. And it's like, if the world did end, what would you really be? Would you be somebody that would make the right choices? Well, quote unquote, right choices. Because I mean, even going to the Dark Man, everybody that went there thought they were making the right choice too. So, I mean, kind of deciding what your right choices are, if you ask me.
Well,
Yeah.
Would the height of the pre-flood mayhem be like that game show thing that happened? Would that
Yeah.
be kind of like the
Becoming president?
culmination of the mayhem before the flood? Because I guess the flood was ongoing until it just wiped everyone out, right?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't there or anything, but yeah, that shit like it was fucking, it was real.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a
But
good
yeah,
point.
you were mentioning sodomites and stuff, so I was thinking, okay, I guess that would be analogous to like that crazy game show that was described like in the beginning of the book or near the beginning of the book, where they were kind of just explaining all the chaos that was happening.
With
Oh, yeah.
and
Yeah.
the speedos with the guns and shit, like blowing motherfuckers away.
Yeah, it was kind of funny. I thought that was kind of funny because weren't they like wearing Zulu costumes or something like that? I remember listening to that. It's been a while, but I was like, man, this is nutty.
Yeah.
The scene, the way that it was described from when I was listening to it, it was a black dude with like a beret on, like, and it was clear that they were ex-military, and it was a group of them, and they had like pink speedos on and just had like fucking big ass 45 cal weapons around their necks, just going around going like, yo man, like next person up, and they just like blow people's heads away one by one. And then apparently like what was left of the military came in and blew them all away. And that was all she wrote. But the sad part is I think it would kind of go down just like that if any of that should happen. And I can't really, and I guess a scarier portion is that I couldn't really blame anybody if it did, because I don't know what I'd do, but I can tell you right now, it wouldn't be good for a lot of people around me. I can tell you that much right now.
That's very honest of you. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, I don't know. Like, that's what's so interesting to think about in fiction. Like, in post-apocalyptic scenarios, I've seen so many representations of post-apocalyptic stories that I always speculate about what I would be like. And especially like in a zombie apocalypse, like one of the only things that I think would be fun about it would be going around killing zombies in all sorts of creative ways, like you see in some of those shows and movies. But like in terms of moral choices, I kind of think that and hope that I would like try to like do the right thing, so to speak. But I don't know for sure how I actually would behave in that scenario until it actually happens. So, and that's part of one of the things that makes even the more evil characters sort of more understandable in the novel, because it's possible that you could act that way in a similar real life situation.
Oh yeah, like the way that I look at it is, I'm like, morals are real easy to bring down to a roux, and it's real easy to be a moral person when you got a full belly and a roof over your head. But you take all that shit away, and you start taking away like lights and warmth and shit like that. It's like, yo, man, people start skinning each other just to have a coat, straight up, and I believe that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this novel shows you how quickly society can devolve into chaos, and how much of a thin veneer civilization is, right?
Well, I mean, I don't think that necessarily this novel needed to do that. I think the Stanford prison study showed us that.
Oh
Like,
yeah,
when you find out that you have just a little bit of authority over somebody and you can subjugate them, and that's just what's going to happen because that's what people kind of break themselves down into the people that are going to subjugate and the people that are subjugated in whatever way that is. But I don't know. That's going off into something that's off topic in this book, but I don't know what would happen. But I have a feeling that, and I mean, I know Stephen King. This is all coming from his imagination, so I know it's not going to be exactly like that. But it was his imagination. I don't think it was too far from the truth. I don't think that at all.
yeah. And I think it's interesting too, how and maybe this is also perhaps more realistic as well, that we never really learned that much about Captain Trips the virus. We just know that it's like seemingly a super flu, and we don't necessarily know why it kills some people but other people are immune. And like there are doctors and they have some medical supplies once Mother Abigail's society is set up, but they're still very far away from having like the modern medical technology that we have now. So they can't find out about a lot of that stuff. And like after the first part of the novel, the virus kind of stops being the main focus of the plot. Like the plot goes much more towards the characters setting up those different societies, and like how they sort of gradually become warring factions.
Well, I mean, I think it's kind of like with any zombie novel as well. If something happens, I mean, what the initial problem is becomes secondary to the society that kind of takes over afterwards. I mean, that's why I thought that The Walking Dead, if you guys have ever like read the graphic novel, one of the first things the author says in the forward to it is he goes, "Yo, I think that if zombies did happen, that would be the secondary thing. You'd have to worry about the survivors and how people want to ultimately take power and they want to divvy that up because one of the first things you do is you kind of, I guess, divide the world up. As Glenn said, you divide the world up into the nations and you go like, how many people agree with me? And if you agree with me, how can I protect you and how can I kill everybody else that doesn't do what I want them to do?" Which, is sad, but I can kind of get the sentiment, sadly. But,
Yeah.
it
Yeah,
is what
it's
it
like
is.
that's why like the title The Walking Dead has that double meaning, right? Because the Walking Dead are the walkers or the zombies, but you also have to be walking dead to survive the society. Like you have to be dead inside and be ruthless to be able to survive, basically. That's one of the main themes that's so interesting. I haven't actually read the graphic novel, but about the show, at least until the later seasons where I think it gets bad, but it starts off really awesome to me.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
What do you think about that, Dusty? Have you read the graphic novel? Are you still
I
there?
haven't read the graphic novels. Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay.
But I played the game, which is actually supposed to be based on the graphic novels more closely than the series. But the game, I don't know. I think the game is actually superior than most of the show. It's really heart wrenching and crazy. But
Oh, okay.
no, I haven't seen the graphic novels, and I'm kind of reluctant to just because the TV show at the later seasons just left a bad taste in my mouth. But
Yeah.
I don't know.
I
Yeah,
didn't
the
even
The Walking Dead is kind of our modern post-apocalyptic um, take on like that. that theme. That's what it is, basically, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, yeah, I mean that's something that we all think about. I think it's a real. I think it's a real thing to think about almost all the time. Is if things like shut the fuck down right now, what would happen? And I don't know. It's an election year, so I don't have the best of predictions on what would happen now.
Especially
Yeah, I
if
know.
Trump wins again.
As soon as Corona hit, I started going through all the Mad Max movies in preparation for the apocalypse.
That's a good idea.
And I actually beat like the Mad Max video game like a month ago.
Oh,
It's
cool. I
like,
didn't
oh, I'm
even know there
ready.
was
I'm
a video
ready
game.
now.
Nice.
Well, I posted a couple of videos from the game on my Twitter account. I don't know if you ever saw any of them, but
No, I don't think I did.
yeah, it's pretty. The ending is just so fucked up. It's like, man, this is like the most fucked up ending. It's worse than the movies for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just trying to prepare myself by imbibing all the Mad Max content that I could possibly gather.
I actually haven't seen the original Mad Max movies with Mel Gibson. I've actually only
What?
seen the newer one. Yeah.
You kidding me?
Yes.
You haven't seen Road Warrior or Thunderdome?
Nope. Maybe
What's
we'll have
wrong with
to
you, man?
remedy that and do movie chats on them.
And honestly,
Yeah, we might have to. You might have to go. Like, the first Mad Max is like nothing like the other two. Um, I'm trying to think of what the first one is like. It's just weird. You'd watch it and you're like, what the hell is this? Is this post-apocalyptic? Not really. It's kind of weird, but yeah, we could definitely go through those if you like. I can't believe you haven't seen the older ones, the
No.
classics, man.
Yeah, I know.
and also seeing Mel Gibson with like a full head of like black hair and like muscles and shit, it'll be like, yo, man, I can totally understand why we put up with the fact that he was like going around calling black people the N word and like calling
Yeah,
Jews.
And calling cops sugar tits.
also, Mel Gibson in his original accent before he adopted an American accent.
Oh yeah, he had the Australian accent then, right?
Well, yeah, that's before he became like a U.S. Hollywood dude.
Right.
This the first Mad Max is basically his first role in a movie.
Okay.
See, that was when we were getting all of our wonderful stars from other places. Like you got Arnold, you got Mel. Let's see, who else came from somebody? Crocodile Dundee was going around in that time too.
Yeah, Crocodile Dundee.
That's not a knife. This is a knife.
You come from someplace else, it's cool, man. Just act in our movies, and like especially the experimental ones. Because you see the first Mad Max, that shit was experimental as fuck. That's why they put a young Mel Gibson into it. They were like, "Yo, man, we don't even know how this is gonna pan out. Just put him."
It's a weird movie. It's hard to describe because it's not quite post-apocalyptic. It's like on the verge of being post-apocalyptic.
Oh, okay.
Like the world building is not there. Like in the first movie, we see this weird world and we don't really know what's going on. And then in the second and third movies, they actually give you like a little prologue to tell you what the state of the world is, and you're like, oh, okay, I get it now.
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely check those out.
It's a good time.
Cool. And then part 2 and 3 are super confusing because one of the actors in the movies plays 2 different characters that do basically the same thing.
Really?
But they're totally different characters. Yeah, there's a guy in the second movie who is like this this pilot who flies like this little chopper around. And in the third movie, there's a dude that flies like this rinky-dink plane around, and it's the same actor, but it's a different character.
Huh. That's interesting.
And it's really confusing because I thought it was the same guy, the same character at first, but it's not.
Right.
It's two different characters.
Huh. That's weird.
More you know. 80s movie trivia.
Yeah. Dusty's probably got more of that than anyone else I know.
What, 80s movie trivia? I just love 80s
You definitely
movies,
introduced me to some great 80s movies lately, like the Paul Verhoeven collection, for example.
Yes, Total Recall.
Yeah.
Yes, Total Recall is 1990, but it's definitely flavored by the 80s.
Well, I had seen that before, but I didn't know it was a Paul Verhoeven movie. And as we discussed when we talked about Starship Troopers and RoboCop, when I first saw Starship Troopers, I had no idea that it was meant to be a satire, and that Paul Verhoeven makes his movies like that often. And now that I look at them as satires, they're way better.
Yeah, it's better once you're in on the joke.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, 80s movies rock, man.
Yeah.
It's the last time
wouldn't be able to get away with it.
Yeah.
No, I don't like movies now. So definitely the 80s, they had more experimentation. In the 90s, it got a little too like. Now that I look at Space Jam, I was like, yo, man, I think that's right when movies started sucking, man.
Space Jam.
Let's see Michael Jordan in an animated movie, guys, with the Looney Tunes.
remember to put those Jordans in all those shots. Remember, they have to be in every shot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah, well, it's the 80s movies that they weren't taking themselves very seriously, and like the action movies. Well, the thing is, like today, like action movies and things are very defined. Like they have, oh, this is action comedy. Oh, this is a thriller. Blah 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 blah. But you take Total Recall, you can't really call it an action comedy, but it is funny in some parts. But it's like
more.
What is this thing? You take a look at it, and it's like nothing like anything that gets made today at all.
Yeah, exactly. Like newer satires, like they're much more clearly satires. They're not like loosely defined satires. Like you kind of have to know what the director's intentions are. Like Paul Verhoeven, like newer satires, like we talked about American Psycho, for example, or especially one of my favorite satires is Thank You for Smoking. Like those are much more clearly defined satires than something like RoboCop or Starship Troopers or Total Recall.
And I don't know, like just now,
yeah, for sure.
It feels like a lot of people just try to just do like I want to have a superhero movie, or I don't want to take any of the risks of having something that won't sell. So now people don't take any risks at all with any of their entertainment. I think that's why YouTube is like kind of coming up, because that's like the last bastion of I can experiment with whatever I want. This is mine, and it is what it is. It's just out there. Whereas movies now, it's like if it's not making $1, like I've noticed that with Disney and a lot of the other things. They're like, yo, like let's just extend things that we know make money. That's why there's like 1,000 Star Wars now. There's probably gonna be like 1,000 Fast and Furious movies.
Yeah,
there's probably gonna be like 1,000 Marvel movies, because they're like, look, man, these make money. Don't make anything new. Just keep on like until that horse is completely like nothing but a bloody mess on the ground. Beat it. Beat this horse.
It's like how
I'll say like there is like a lot of Star Wars content now. Some of it is actually pretty good. Like I don't know if you guys watch any of The Mandalorian, but man, that's like the license used correctly.
My favorite. I haven't seen Mandalorian, but my favorite Star Wars stories still are the Knights of the Old Republic video games that I played when I was a teenager. Those RPGs where you can choose to be good or evil. I love those. They should make movies about the set in the Old Republic. That would be so cool.
Yeah, the problem is that Disney decanonized the Old Republic.
Oh, they did?
So, yeah,
Yep.
when Disney took over, they decanonized the extended universe.
Oh, okay.
Because
so they can do anything now.
Nobody says this, but Disney's the devil, and they're trying to program the children. And they've been trying to do that for a long time. Fuck you, Walt Disney. And you can say that directly from me. Suck my dick, Walt. Suck it from the grave.
He was from
I went to your fucking shitty park too. I know you didn't want any niggas to go to your park, but I went. Fuck you, Disney.
Yeah, he was phenomenally anti-Semitic and racist, wasn't he?
Yo, seriously. He was like one of the biggest racists ever, and everybody's like, yo, man, did you see how he was making that wonderful mouse that was on it? I was like, yeah. I remember the very first Mickey Mouse black and white cartoon I ever saw. You know what it was called? You're a sat, Mr. Jap. And it had like some slanty-eyed peoples, and it was supposed to support the war.
Really?
Oh,
wow.
he was doing back in the motherfucking 20. Oh, shit, that's crazy.
You know that Dr. Seuss wrote an American propaganda film for World War II that was designed to drill up support for America going into World War II?
Duh, everybody did. Shit,
yeah.
I was like, everybody got to fucking shoot those crowds right in their fucking crowd ass heads. Who else?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I know Seuss was a political cartoonist before he got into children's books.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, okay. That makes more sense then. Yeah.
Yeah, he did political cartoon. Like, when I'm talking about cartoons, like we're talking in the paper. Like he did political little comic strips.
Oh, okay.
That makes sense. You're probably doing it like, yo, man, these people aren't picking up what I'm putting down with these political ones. Got to get them younger.
Yep.
Like they're doing all this extra thinking and shit. Got to make sure that you get them with some rhymes and shit like that. They'll eventually think the way I want them to. Just fucking give it enough time.
Yeah.
The Lorax.
Yeah.
The Lorax. Or I always think of, now that I like look at Dr. Seuss, I think of that joke they had in Family Guy, where it's like Horton hears domestic violence in the next room, and he doesn't like. There's probably two sides to this motherfucking story. I don't need to call the cops for that. Yeah, I bet you the people in the car next to Rihanna and Chris Brown, they thought the same shit, huh? Like they're around the same fight. That's an even fight. Fuck them.
Well, whenever I heard domestic violence near my apartment, I just kind of watched and listened and rubbernecked. I never really thought of calling the cops, but like the domestic violence that I'm talking about is like middle class, so we're not talking about, physical violence. Just talking about people screaming at the top of their lungs and breaking
abuse.
shit.
Yeah.
Well, wait a second. But do you ever, like, if you hear something that's just a little too close to home, you go like, "Ooh, you got to call the cops because he's about to kill her." Be like, "And your mama's a bitch," and you'd be like, "Oh, snap."
No, if I heard like moaning or something after like a scuffle, yeah. But most of what I hear is just people screaming at each other over dumb shit, like at 6 a.m.
Right.
At 6 a.m.
Yeah, like I swear, like most of it happened that early.
That's on the real. That's a level of misery I can't. Like, who even wakes up and gets pissed off that early? Like, I at least need to. I don't even have the energy to get pissed off till at least 7. God damn, this is starting early. God damn.
Yeah, I'm just like having my cereal, and then I hear screaming outside, and then and then the cops show up. Somebody does call the cops. This is not me. The cops do show up. I'm just not the one that's calling them.
Oh, okay.
Fair enough.
Yeah, our neighbors, our last neighbors on the other side of the duplex where I live, there was clearly some domestic violence going on there, and it would happen like at least once a week. I would be in my basement lifting weights, and I would hear like this woman screaming and this guy screaming at her, and then she would start like crying, and I didn't hear any hitting or anything, but it sounded like domestic violence. But every time before I was about to call the cops, I heard sirens already because someone in the neighborhood had heard it too and already had called the cops.
What does Canadian domestic violence sound like anyway? It's like, hey, 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 cut that out, hey. I don't like what you just said there, hey.
Well, especially because there are a lot of newfies here too. So if it's like newfies getting into a fight, be like, "Hey there, bye, stop there, bye. Ah, you're pushing me through the door hole, bye. Ah."
Oh, that's hilarious.
With the bass in the background going like, yo, man, it's fucking harsh on my buzz. This domestic fucking violence y'all doing out here. Adventures in Canada land.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I know we're making light of domestic violence, but
oh yeah,
it's a bad problem. There's jokes.
I feel like I have to say what stand-up comedians say and say, these are jokes. I don't mean it.
No, first off, if I'm going to be involved in anything, we apologize for nothing. Fuck you if you took offense to that. How many people got smacked upside the fucking head just because we just started joking about domestic violence? I don't give a shit like that. I'll joke about it all day long. I didn't hit anybody.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm like, and if you did listen to this and you're like, yo, man, some random dude on the internet just told me it's cool to hit women. I was like, you're weak. And like, I don't know, like you get what you get. And you should be arrested. So, that's just the way I look at it. But, I'm harsh. I'm a Neanderthal. I don't.
Yeah. Well, like, I think people, like especially men who abuse women, I think that comes mostly from insecurity and from weak men, like you were kind of alluding to there. Like, they don't have any self-confidence and they don't feel powerful, so they hurt women who are weaker than them to feel powerful. Which is like, it's like
alcohol too.
Oh yeah, alcohol is not good for that for some people.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like a dude.
Most of the domestic violence that I've seen usually was the result of someone drunk.
Mm-hmm.
Except for those people at 6 a.m. They're just weird and crazy people.
They could be drinking when they get up. Could be alcoholics. Who knows?
I don't think so. I think they're just crazy. Like most of it was a dude getting kicked out of the apartment and him screaming at the door and pounding on it. It's like, come on. Like, fuck, it's 6 a.m. Like, do you need to scream outside your apartment door and wake up everybody else? Like, really?
Dusty, how many bad breakups have you been through? Because I can tell you right now, yes, sometimes at 6 a.m. you do need to yell. And
not me.
Well, I mean, obviously you sound like you're a sagacious young man, and therefore you probably make better decisions with women. But I can tell you right now, I've been that dude that's been at 6 o'clock in the morning going like, bitch, and you better give me my goddamn underwear back too, motherfucker.
Well, I've always like my theory is if you pretend to not care, that is more hurtful than standing outside the door screaming.
Oh, that's good for you being like all zen and shit like that. I'm not like that. I tell you, I'm like, and you know exactly how I feel about you. You ain't shit. Your mom ain't shit, and your mama's mom ain't been shit either. Suck my dick. I'm out. And then I just. But like I said, I'm a Neanderthal. Don't listen to me. I'm.
No, I've never actually yelled. I just, I usually just extricate.
You know
I
what,
say
man?
nothing and I leave.
How could you not yell? Like, have
Never.
you ever dated a woman? They curse and yell
Plenty.
immediately. They
I've
call you.
yelled once. Okay. Once I did yell because I was just getting really pissed off. Like I was so pissed off, I didn't drive her home. I just kicked her out of the car and drove home. That's how mad I was, and I wasn't like yelling. I wasn't really yelling. I just said, "All right, well, I don't want to talk to you anymore. I'm just gonna leave you here at this corner, and you can walk home." And then I left. Like I'm putting up with this shit.
Because if it was nighttime, I need to know the level of pissed off. Because that's like as a dude, you go like, something might happen, but she didn't want to get left.
It was dusk. It was dusk. So if she hurried her ass up, she would have got home before dark. But it was like probably like 6:30 or 7 in the evening.
No, that's respectable hour. That's not even bad. Like like me, I'll get pissed off. And I'll be like, "Yo, it's 12 a.m." Well, I guess you should have made it. I guess if I knew that I was out with somebody at 12 a.m., I know I would have acted real nice if I wasn't my own ride. But I guess you just didn't think that.
No. Well, we got Uber now, so like the impact isn't as deep. Like back then when I did it, the cell phones weren't a big thing. This was when I was in high school, so most of us didn't have cell phones. Yeah, this is like in 99, 2000, 2001, before everybody and their mom had a cell phone. So I kicked her out. She would have to go to a payphone or something like that to call a cab. But she was like a 30-minute walk from home, so it's not like it wasn't it wasn't like she had to call a cab to get home. She just would have to walk for a while. But yeah, this was before Uber and cell phones and all that crap.
What like that's cool that you did that and shit, but what led up to it? Because I want to know. I want to what she said.
Like okay, so we were going Christmas shopping, and then she was like rolling up my passenger window, and I told her like, "Be careful! Like, what are you doing?" She was trying to force it up or something like that. I was like, "You don't need to press hard on the window," and then she broke the fucking window.
Oh.
And then I was like, okay, I'll fix this later. And then she started talking shit about my car. I was like,
you broke my window.
So you're gonna talk shit about my car, and then yeah, you're gonna talk shit about my car, and then I'm the one giving you a ride. It's like fuck that. Like, get out.
So you dated. You dated a loser. Like
What?
a lot of women talk about loser dudes, but like women don't talk about loser women all that often. Yeah, man, there are loser women out there that'll do shit like that. Congratulations. That's why you got to kick them out of your fucking car.
Yeah.
Well, it's like she didn't. It's like I paid for this shit with my own money, and if she's had cars before that her parents have given her, but it's like what the fuck. Like, exactly. I work for this shit.
It's times like that where we go, yo, I know that Chris Brown, like, he's a bad person for hitting Rihanna, but maybe you ought to do some your window shit. And maybe, I'm not saying that was the right way to handle it, but, I understand.
Yeah, so it's like, okay, you're going to talk shit about my car. That means, you don't need to ride in it. So I was like, yeah, you can get out. I didn't kick her out immediately. Like I stewed over it for a while, like in my head. Like I was silent after that. I just went completely silent and then out of the blue, it's like, you got to walk the rest of the way home because it's if you think my car is shit, then you don't need to be in it.
Right. Well,
And then she
especially
actually ended up calling me back like an hour later and apologized. I was like, yeah, whatever.
Oh,
You
okay.
introduced options into her mind. Maybe next time she won't do that shit. And on top of that, yo, I'll be real. That was real nice, man. That was real nice of what you did. If anybody out there goes, you see how cool he was? Didn't ask you to pay for anything or anything. He just said, get the fuck out of my car because she insulted him. That's real cool, man. Remember that.
No, I didn't ask you to fix it. I was like, yeah, whatever. I'm not gonna. I know. Just whenever you ask about money and shit, that's when things get nasty. And I wasn't gonna take it to that level. I just like forget about it.
Right.
Yo, that's like I said, that's real nice of you because I would have went like, you gonna fuck up my window, and then you ain't even gonna come off of any money when all you had to do was just fucking listen to me and like not touch it. That's cool.
Yeah, because I think there was the window. Like, I don't know what the hell was going on, but she was trying to roll it up past where it can go up. I was like, the window's all the way up. Why are you trying to make it go up more?
Yeah.
I was like just like forcing it up. I was like, what are you doing?
Mm-hmm. You know what? I
It.
don't turn to the He-Man 8 Woman Club thing, so you know, like I'm just getting like kind of angry for you. But yeah, man, like I said, that's
Oh,
definitely
this was years ago, man. This was like years ago. That's like that's like the most angry I've ever gotten at a woman.
well, yeah.
That's it. That's the extent of my anger. It just she had to work really hard to get there. It was usually I didn't get pissed off so easily.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
you were in high school, right?
Yeah, I was in high school. Or
That's
right
what
out of high school.
I wouldn't have had that level of restraint in high school.
that's what I'm saying. I was like, no, you did amazing for high school. I was like, yo, man, in high school, I didn't even have those kind of like tools. I wouldn't even have been able to like talk myself out. I was like, yo, man, you're going to jail today.
You're going to jail today.
It's like, yo, you gotta get rid of the body, bro. Like that's
Well, yeah. Well, it's because I knew just by the environment that I was around, my dysfunctional relatives and whatnot, that I didn't know what not to do. So I was like, I'll just do my thing, and you do your thing, and I'm just gonna kick you out of my car. I'm sorry. I didn't yell at her either.
No, you
I
don't.
did not yell.
You don't sound like you're a yeller, man. Like between all of us, I
No.
feel like the only person that's bringing yelling energy might be me. So, everybody else is real cool in this convo.
You're cool for the most part. You're mostly only getting energy when you're being hilarious.
Oh, no, man. Like honestly, I'm mostly hilarious when I'm the most mad because then everything comes to my mind. I go like, "Motherfucker, and you have this too, and this, and this, and that's just how my mind works." But yeah,
Yeah. This actually we could actually relate this whole theme that we were talking about, relationships, back to the book. The because in The Stand there are, as we've been talking about, in terms of the characters in general, there are a lot of different manifestations of relationships and the way people behave in them, with the different characters, and even different ways in which the same characters operate differently, right? Like Larry Underwood's a good example. Like when he's earlier on in the book, he like just wants to get laid, and then he ends up with that older woman that he's taking care of, and he's like banging her even though she's like kind of old and saggy, but he's always like wanting to yell at her, but even then he's already trying to reform himself and restrain his anger a little bit, and then later on he sort of he can like restrain that part of himself a little more, and then he ends up, is it Lisa? He ends up treating, I think it's Lisa, a lot better. And then there's like, of course, the relationship that Franny had with the father of her child, and then the relationship that she had with Stu, and the relationship that Harold attempted to have with her, and the relationship that Nadine attempted to have with Larry, and then ended up having with Harold. There are some interesting dynamics in the story in terms of that.
Oh yeah. I mean,
yeah, Harold is weird because it's kind of like the trope where he is trying to claim ownership over Franny throughout, most of the book, and he's like gets super jealous. But yeah, he's strange. He kind of reminds me of like an incel or something. Is like the incel of the book, because it's funny when we say he's the incel of the book, because when he gets offered sexual favors by Nadine, that basically puts him on her finger, like wrapped around her finger, because he has, it's kind of implied that he's like a virgin, right, until that point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so he is an incel written in literature.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. That's for sure. Yeah.
And he kind of reminds me of Elliot Rodger a little bit. Like I said, he claims ownership, and because he's not getting what he wants, he's kind of has a tantrum.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a good parallel.
I thought it was interesting the fact that he not only claimed ownership, but he tried to just take from every situation that he had. So even if he was trying to do something good, it never came from a good place. And it was kind of like this resentment that he always had. And it's like how you can have resentment that like carries into your relationships. So even when he was doing something good, like it was always colored with this like tinge of like, ugh. So it's like if there were people that had like a sixth sense, they just kind of stayed away from him. I'm thinking mostly about like Joe or Leo, like not even wanting to come into his house because they're like, yeah, there's something just off about that dude. Like it's not coming from a genuine place. And the fact that he could only really cultivate a relationship with anybody, and that person was Nadine, but she was also coming from a not good place. And that's like, it was almost like they wouldn't have been as bad if they hadn't met one another, but they needed to meet one another. They almost, with everything they did, it could have been nothing but them meeting one another because they had that kind of energy. They pushed everybody else that had anything good for them away. And anytime they saw anything good, they pushed that away. Whereas if you take the relationship that Franny had with Stu, when Stu met Harold, for instance, they didn't like each other, and Stu didn't necessarily like Harold. But instead of taking that situation and going, "Let me take something from this dude," he's like, "Look, we have to deal with each other. I don't want to be alone. Let me bring life into this situation." Instead of trying to do what Nadine and Harold had done with their relationship, which was essentially use each other for each other's, well, Harold's perversions and Nadine's necessity to get to the Dark Man.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And you see,
Andrew, would you say that both Nadine and Harold had the Dark Man's taint?
yeah, that's a that's a Wheel of Time. That's a Wheel of Time reference, because the Dark One's taint is what makes characters go bad. Yeah, I would say so for sure. Yeah, because he's even like manipulating them in their dreams, more so than other characters, as we talked about before, and they're listening to him more, as we also discussed
Until
before.
I ran Riode.
Yeah, in the dream world. Yeah, that's the dream world in the Wheel of Time.
And that's also interesting in how they both drew their armies as well, because Dusty had talked about it earlier with the fact that the Dark Man kind of commanded, but he didn't necessarily command. He commanded through desire, and it was desire for what was ever in people's hearts. So some people were very afraid of him. I mean, everybody was afraid of him, but some people were drawn to that fear because they felt like, well, fear is power, but who thinks that fear is power? Like that's a tenuous power. I mean, even that was alluded by Nadine later on when she loses her mind and she gets killed. She's like, look, like it's a tenuous thing if you rule by fear, because eventually people are going to stop being afraid because even you yourself that's ruling is afraid. And when people see, I mean, that's why Lloyd wanted to get away from him, and that's what made Lloyd ultimately have his question of the Dark Man in the first place. Like, oh, you don't know, you're not as powerful as everybody thought. You're just as afraid as everybody else is. You just hide it and act like this bravado is going to put you through. And it's the ultimate in, I guess, the deception that he has, because he makes everybody think he's ultimately he's confident, but in reality, his relationship with everybody and everything that he makes as far as his world goes is based off of nothing but fear.
Yeah, yeah, well said. Totally.
Fear and deception. Because we do see that he lies a lot, especially towards the end of the book when he's coloring the people, the envoy that was sent. He's like he basically makes up a whole bunch of lies about them, especially the conversation between him, Lloyd, and the professor. And the professor is just espousing truth, and this kind of puts a chink in his armor that forces Flagg to command Lloyd to shoot him, because the truth that he was speaking was just way too dangerous for him to speak it. So it's like, yeah, you got to kill this guy right away. His truth is way too dangerous. He's going to expose me and everything, and everything as a sham here. So we got to get rid of him right away.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. What do you guys think about the way, basically the way the Dark Man's society ended? We talked about this a little bit earlier, but with Trash Can Man finally finding a nuclear weapon and bringing it there, and then there's this like weird thing with Randall Flagg's, or the Dark Man's, supernatural powers getting like enormous right at that point, and you see him like turn into this this like giant demon basically at that one part, and then like basically everyone dies and we see the other characters see a giant mushroom cloud. I thought that was an interesting, like I talked about a little bit earlier, that was an interesting way to end the Dark Man's character, and it made it even more interesting because it seemed like a bit of a sudden ending of his character that made me like the very last part of the novel where he like he sort of comes back and we see him again and we get the implication that he's going to come back in some other manifestation of evil. So I thought that was interesting with those two parts together. What did you guys think about it?
So I think you know me. Like I told you before, Andrew, that I wasn't too happy about that ending.
No?
Well, I was like, okay, so we have a literal Deus Ex Machina ending here, where God is coming and intervening and saving the day for them. But I kind of do understand, at least, that they kind of frame that there's supernatural and religious powers at work in the book. It would be different if it was just like out of nowhere. But the end of the book does build up to the conflict between God and whatever the manifestation of evil is, which is Randall Flagg and his demonic visage. But I still am a little bit iffy about that ending. I was like, man, you just nuked everybody. That's how we're doing it here. We have a literal hand of God coming down and touching the bomb and blowing things up. I was like, oh, okay, all right, I'll take it in. But at least it didn't really end on that note because we do have a bit of more of an epilogue after that with the return of Tom and Stu. I
Yeah.
think I would have been really pissed off if the book just ended there with the mushroom cloud.
Me
I
too.
think
Yeah.
the last part of it does redeem the ending. They're like, oh, okay, there's more coming here. But
Yeah.
I was okay. I thought it's like, no, I was just kind of like, okay, this is. I understand why he ended it the way he did, but it's not as satisfying as I thought it could have been. Just like that climax, the climax of ending Flag and everybody else. Because I don't think everybody in that town deserved to be blown up. To be
No,
honest,
definitely not. Like especially Larry and the other like so-called good guys who were with him, and especially
and there was a
the people.
faction that was going to defect.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna say. Like the people that were having doubts about the Dark Man and were planning on leaving. Yeah.
Yeah,
like,
and
wow.
I had thought that the ending was kind of apropos. I felt it had the air of good and evil is always going to be kind of around no matter what. We're always kind of leading towards the ultimate battle between good and evil, which I thought was kind of a metaphor of, you have Nadine, and Franny,
Well,
you have Larry, and you also have Harold, and you have like the different things that it's like, yeah, you can always make a choice. So it's almost like every day as we live, whether it's in this pandemic or something like that, you always have little tiny choices to be a little bit better or a little bit worse. And which side are you really kind of on just as a person on a daily basis, which is what I kind of thought was the overall like message of the novel in general.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I had
I just had
I
a
had
musing.
similar thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking. Nadine's hair was turned white by Randall Flagg's demon sperm.
That's true.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, he like fucked her in her dreams, and then her hair goes totally white. Or he sort of like dream raped her in a way. It was weird.
I thought they actually met up. Like I didn't think that was a dream sequence. Was it a
Oh,
dream
you think that was
sequence?
his physical body?
No,
It
he
could have
he,
been.
he
That's
met up with her and he filled
Oh, he
her.
did. Oh,
That's
okay.
what it said. He filled her with whatever the dark power was, and then she was just well. That was when she went insane. But there was a dream sequence, and then she had gone. Her hair had
Oh yeah, I
gone.
mean earlier on. I don't mean when she actually meets him. When she meets him later on, she's like wanting him, and then she's scared of him, and then the what was going to be sex becomes rape. And I thought it was weird, like how, and even more fucked up, that she was like scared of his dick too. His dick seemed evil. That was like fucked up. Yeah,
And we've all been there. I've heard that. All right.
that your dick is evil.
I mean, yeah, but that doesn't.
a demon penis.
Call me Randall Flagg out here.
Randall Flagg's demon.
I'm a gangster in the streets, Randall Flagg in the sheets, motherfucker. Oh,
Yeah.
man. All right, right now. There we go. We're using that at the comedy store.
Yeah, yeah.
You say, bitch, I'll turn your hair white, bitch.
It's like, you want that dick so good, turn your hair white? Yeah, I know. That's exactly. They call
Yeah.
that Ghostbuster dick.
Yeah. Randall Flagg's demon sperm should be the tagline for this episode.
I don't know, man. I don't want my face to be on some shit like that.
I'm just joking.
Other world like Pornhub shit, man. You know. But yo, man, I'm not gonna lie. I think my time, you guys can talk as much as you need to. I think my time is basically up.
Oh, okay, that's cool,
man.
That's
yeah,
cool.
I think all of our times are basically up.
Yeah,
Usually
yeah,
we end it around this time.
Yeah,
No
yeah, that
problem.
sounds good to me, man. Yeah, sure. We can end it here. Well, thanks so much for talking about this book, guys, and of course the other topics we discussed too, which was always fun. Is always fun, and yeah,
Domestic
this is a
violence.
fucking great book. If people watching this haven't read it, I highly recommend it. I'm sure all of us do. It's a super long book, but super worth it for sure. And yeah, like I always say, thanks to those of you who watch this, to those of you who subscribe to my channel, press the like button on the video, add comments about your thoughts, especially if you want to get mad at us about joking about domestic violence. That's a good thing to bring up in the comments. And yeah, thanks especially to those of you who give me money on Patreon, which I really appreciate. And like I always say, I love you all. Keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. And most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all, and groove is in the heart. And choose the side of the light rather than the side of the darkness. All right. Guys, got anything else to say before we end it here?
Got nothing.
I'm all good.
All right. Cool. Well, thanks, guys. And thanks, everyone, for watching. And adios until next time.
All right.